okay? Yeah, thank you. Sorry. Hopefully you could hear me. But here is how you can use Kamailio, or where is the place of Kamailio in voice over IP telephony network, either connecting devices or connecting the traffic from devices to gateways, to media servers. Could be for transcoding or could be for some other kind of feature. Could be even like a gateway to Twitter for instant messaging. So it's not only audio video, it's also instant messaging present that you can do with Kamailio and with SIP as a protocol. Now going to more into the development side of, as FOSDEM it's oriented for developers, I'm going to speak about Kamailio configuration file a bit, which actually is like a scripting language. It has a part with global parameters. You could see like global variables from your point of view. It's about Kamailio being configured to listen on some specific IP port, a specific transport layer like UDP, TCP, TLS. And then we have the part that it's used for routing the SIP packet. So you will have to actually think about Kamailio as not being a telephony engine, but more like a SIP packet router. So you get access to every SIP packet that goes on the network, and it's up to you via the configuration file to decide, okay, that's Daniel, let's see, Daniel, it's a local user, I would like to route to it, so it's a location service that you can put together and the call is sent to a device. It's a telephone number that looks like a mobile number, then you can send it to a gateway towards mobile PSTN networks. So it's up to you to decide everything to the very small details, including authentication. You can drop scanning attacks and so on. So this scripting language is giving you the tools to decide. So you can look at headers, you can look at source IP, and a lot of other attributes related to this SIP package that you received. Now, as I said, we started in 2001 the project. At that time, there was not a clear choice for a scripting language. It was Perl, and Perl still exists there, but somehow it was not designed for recurrent execution of the same script. So a lot of libraries don't care about memory. They don't free it because they expect that the interpreter is shut down after the one-time execution of the script. Then Python was not really that famous in being fast back in late 90s, early 2000s. So as we targeted from the beginning, large deployments was not a choice. Lua probably was there, but somehow we never found it at that time and probably was not that developed. So at the end, the decision was writing from scratch, and of course you have some benefits. You can control everything about that interpreter because you write it, you know. If that action is triggered, it's up to you to do it. If that return code, it's return it, it's up to you to interpret it as you like. And then, of course, you can optimize it for your specific needs because we know we have to deal mainly with routing SIP packets, and also can control the evolution of the language, how it's going to be developed over the time, the structure, and so on and so forth. But then a lot of drawbacks that we discover over the time, like we had to reinvent the wheel for a lot of small operation, you know, all these string operations, substring, concatenation, and so on. You will have to implement it in C, which is the language used for Kamailio, and then exported it to these self-made scripting languages. Then there are no external libraries that you can just import and use. You'll have to write as a module inside Kamailio if you want to extend this language, or actually also in the core you can do it. Then it's not used outside Kamailio, so practically you don't get the benefit of other people testing it in other conditions with different input that could reveal eventually some side effects on different operation, and that would be useful. And also because of the initial design, there are also some limitation in terms of how the script interpreter behaves. It does a lot of optimization as startup, sort of compilation in memory, and then making the reload harder because we keep a lot of references to some pointers in private memory for each process. So there were some limitation that some people started to complain about it. So the solution over the time was like trying to somehow offer an alternative for the people that would like to have this more or less main demands about an option to reload the routing logic without restart, and then ability to have more feature and be more flexible with these scripting languages, because at the beginning it was only like VoIP, but now it's integration with a lot of other systems. Backends like NoSQL, you know, every other day it's another NoSQL popping up, and maybe you want to use it. So we added like 2 versions ago a framework in the core, and we named it Kamailio Embedded Interface. And the idea was to have a mechanism that a module exports a function to this framework, and the framework propagates it to many other scripting languages, not only our native scripting language. It was added in 5.0. Now we are already at the version 5.1, and it's implemented now for 4 scripting engines: Lua, Python, JavaScript, and Squirrel scripting, a small one which I actually developed more for teaching and having others, a small module that could use as an inspiration, but it's very similar to Lua, and actually in that matter also similar to the JavaScript duct tape interpreter. We still have some other modules that allows you to execute inline scripts or application written in Perl, which was actually the first interpreter added in Kamailio, and then .NET with all this sharp Visual Basic, and then also a Java, which I haven't really touched, but someone contributed. As a matter of fact, we have, as you could see in the second slide, over 200 extensions. Now, when I say inline execution, we have the default configuration scripting language with our routing blocks, and somewhere inside there is a function Lua run, and you can pass like a method name which is defined in an external Lua script. So inline, it's also Kamailio becomes the interpreter of the Lua. It's initialized at the startup, and then just inline execution inside the old native scripting language, which was used for many years, but people wanted a bit more flexibility. So this is, if you are not familiar, this is kind of our scripting languages. We define it route as being the keyword for what would be a equivalent of a function. Then we add the name for the route, like the name of the function. Parameters we don't provide because practically each variable is like a global variable in this scripting language. So it's rather simplified scripting language. And then we define our tokens like URI, it's a request URI, the address of the target, and then adding headers and so on are functions that we export through our modules to this scripting language, again, written from scratch. And now let's look, maybe you can picture a bit this small function from our native scripting language, and I'll try to walk through the 4 that implement the KEM interface and show the equivalent and give some information about these scripting languages. So we already had another presentation about Lua in real-time communication with Janus. It exists in FreeSwitch and Asterisk, so it's like Lua, it's eating the RTC world, more or less, in terms of scripting. It was added as an extension for inline execution like 8 years ago. It's a very small and fast interpreter. Sometimes you get it in pair with the equivalent C code that we implemented in native code. And of course, one of the features that you have with this scripting engine that you can use now, you can reload this scripting file without restarting Kamailio. So practically down there is the equivalent that you will have to write in Lua. So again, one slide back, this is native configuration file about more or less adding a header to the SIP message and sending out. And here it's the same. Testing if it's targeting myself as a server, then adding a header and sending out through the socket we are using it. So pretty much equivalent, but the power of this scripting language, using this scripting language, is not just using the equivalent or what we export from Kamailio. It's importing whatever other library you find out there for Lua. Maybe you need to interconnect with CouchDB, maybe you need to interconnect with some self-made API server, and you have better, I don't know, HTTP API or NetString or RPC libraries in Lua, so you don't need to implement anything anymore in C. And then it's a link to a larger file that could be a starting point if you want to use Lua for your scripting languages. Again, you can build anything like from telephony system to instant messaging and any other real-time communication systems with Kamailio. So used by telecoms with over 10 million of phone connected to the platform. The second one would be JavaScript, but think about as scripting languages. Don't think about that complex stuff that you get in the browser that access the HTML elements and so on. There is a basic scripting language behind it with the the common math and string operation plus the grammar to define function objects and structure in the JavaScript. It's not any big browser JavaScript engine. It's an open source engine, but it's quite fast and easy to understand. It's called Duct Tape. It's available on GitHub. Doesn't have much external libraries that you can use, still fairly decent there, but it's providing no dependency inside Kamailio because the Duct Tape project provides a single C file and include file that you can import, and they recommend to use this one. So practically you don't depend on an external library. You can just have Kamailio, compile it, and you have this JavaScript, which of course gives you more flexibility in the operation plus reloading, which is one of the desired feature inside Kamailio. Then we have UpPython. I'm not the original developer of this module. I'm not much into the Python. I just added the extension to see the exports done through the Kemi framework. As a matter of that, right now the reloading it's not working properly. I started to implement it, but as I don't have the proper knowledge, to put it that way, to look at to see how the Python interpreter can reload the script, I still need a bit of time. On the other hand, from the community, this seems to be very popular, especially because of the extensions you have in Python. So probably if you don't find the library in Python for what you need, then you will have to write it anyhow from scratch, because very unlikely to find it somewhere else. Again, the link and the equivalent, you see it's pretty much very small. And again, this is the equivalent of an existing Kamailio routing block, but otherwise the benefits would be plug your own libraries and mix the code. From Kamailio point of view, you just get a new module, KSR, standing for Kamailio SIB routing, with a lot of other submodules and functions. And the last I have implemented for, it's Squirrel, which again was from more or less splitting from Lua, because Lua is a bit loose in terms of the grammar for the language itself, and this guy that is more or less one main developer tried to have a more strict scripting languages. On that matter, it's quite fast as I tested, but in terms of extension and the structure of language, it's also quite limited because it's not that popular. There are some gaming engine using it, but also with this one, again, maybe you can use it as a teaching mechanism, or you can use it in embedded interfaces because it's also very small, and the interpreter, it's imported in our module because not so many distributions use them, and I wanted to have an option to reload if you want with a very small interpreter. Now, what's the state? And pretty much getting to the end. Practically, most of the modules that we implemented in Kamailio export their function also to the Kami framework. So this KSR module has now over 600 functions that you can use in Python, in Lua. Everything to control, like timeout of transaction, where to route it, redirect of the traffic, connecting the calls together. Everything that is available in the scripting languages is pretty much there. Again, it's not 100% because there are some modules that we didn't get there, like the IMS one, but that's a big beast that needs to be approached at some point. You have examples, like complete example of a telephony routing engine with Python, Lua, SQL, JavaScript in that link. And don't forget, if you need and have a library written in another language, you can still use inline execution for a lot of these .NET languages with mono interpreter. Perl is still there, and Java, if you are having something that you can reuse there. So probably for mono, as I am the developer of that interpreter as well, would be easier for me to add. I haven't done the up Perl and up Java, and if the other developers are not jumping in, very unlikely that I will allocate resources for. It's not much. I'm really willing to help if you need, but it's unlikely that I will do it myself alone. And eventually, as a shout out there, if you use Python and you want to have a reload, please approach me to test it. I will do the coding, but I need someone to test and eventually help me if it's a bit familiar with embedding Python on, again, reloading the scripting languages. So thank you. I see a lot of people from the community in terms of developers, likely 15 here. Thanks for coming again to real-time development room here at FOSDEM and helping actually, because some people will jump and take my place here. Once again, thank you. If you have a question until we shift to the next presenter, please say it. Otherwise, Matt, I think, is the next one. You should come down here. A question.
What's the performance impact of this when switching between what was native and what's the external languages? And have you got any benchmarks?
Yeah, I did a very basic benchmark, and practically at that time there was only Lua and Python. And for Lua, you barely see any, it's in terms of microseconds, and sometimes I didn't know it was a virtual machine, and I didn't know which was the reason for that, because it was like sometimes the least execution time was in Lua, sometimes it was in the native scripting languages. Because if you are familiar with Lua, exporting is like just executing a pointer to the function in Lua. Last year in the Lua dev room, I presented more about this interpreter because I learn writing programming languages. I'm a computer science engineer, and I did some optimization to really pass the pointer at the end. It's just only index, one index in direction in between Lua and the C code. Python was a bit slower, because the guy that designed the module made it a bit strange from my opinion, but maybe a bit better from Python developers, because try to export an object. So for each message, it's creating an object, which takes a bit longer. So it was like twice slower with Python, but it was still like, for my test, was like 2,000 registration per second in Python in a single thread. So depending on how many children and so on, but it was only a registration. So performance is still good.
Is that blocking?
We have, no, because this is like, it's initiated at the start, and it's up to you to use it always with Lua or always with native scripting language. Or if you use inline, again, we load everything at startup. It's why that reload is somehow demanded, because in the past, we didn't do anything if you change in the script language. Now, if you change the script language, you have to send an RPC command to Kamailio, please reload. And then with the next message, we'll read it from the file and will be effective.
In processing the message,
yeah.
is that process then locked?
Yeah, that process until, yeah, a process from the moment it receives the C message until it sends out does only that one. But you create many of them, and we have some asynchronous framework if you need to suspend and do something else and then resume the same message later.
That's compatible with the Kemi framework.
Yeah, it is compatible, the same function are exported. Stefan? Probably yes. As I said, I'm but again, we create processes. So probably it's per process. We don't have threads. I said it like thread, but actually we create processes. And then I think it's per process a log, but that's somehow how we do it in Kamailio. Last one here, because we get late, and Matt, please be around. The next speaker. Okay.
JavaScript are using Node as the interpreter?
Which one?
JavaScript.
Yep.
Are you using Node.js?
No, it's using duct tape interpreter, which is written from scratch, but quite popular as I could see the feedback from the project. It's embedded in many other applications, and it's also targeting use of JavaScript in embedded devices. Because Node.js is using the one from Chromium, right, which is C++ actually. I wanted the C1, and this is maybe not that complete at the one, but it's very fast. It's in pair more or less with Lua. Okay, thank you. And